Welcome back to the Izzy Lala podcast. I'm Izzy Lala, and I'm a writer and an artist from Sacramento, California. And this podcast is a podcast where we are basically learning and just discussing some cultural topics that I hope will benefit you guys in a positive way. So last week we talked about affordable housing and plans and development that's going on in Sacramento. And so I thought I'd bring on a affordable housing professional. Kory Vance is a poet and a affordable housing expert and professional. And I know Kory from poetry circles in Sacramento, and we both frequent Luna's Cafe, or have in the past. Shout out to Luna's. And
Luna's.
So yeah, we'll just, I guess, jump right into it with Kory. So Kory, tell us a little bit about like where you're from and
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as an intro to that, I'll just tell you something I learned today about Luna's, since that's where we know each other. Someone told me that they Yelped Luna's, and if you Yelp Luna's Cafe in Sacramento, mine is the first picture on the cover picture.
Oh, really?
Of me on stage. Yeah.
Oh,
so I'm Yelp famous.
Yes.
I don't know how that compares to Instagram famous, or
Hey, that's some kind of fame, I'm sure.
It's something. Yeah. But no, to answer your question, yeah, I've been living in Sacramento for over 3 years now. I'm originally from Southeast Missouri, and I've spent a lot of time living outside of Missouri. I've lived in several states, and came here essentially through the profession of housing and community development. So I have been in housing, affordable housing and community development my entire career, outside of my poetry career, right? I've worked in almost every area of the field. So I've worked in homeless intervention. I've worked in intensive neighborhood revitalization. I've worked in community organizing, home repair, energy efficiency for low-income homeowners. I've worked on the financial coaching side of things. And now I work in housing and lending. So I work with a CDFI now, which is essentially a nonprofit that can act like a bank. So we can make down payment assistance loans for first-time home buyers who are on the low-income scale of the spectrum, to help people get to the next phase where they can build some equity and wealth for their family, and kind of everything in between. So I'm very passionate about housing because I'm passionate about communities. I believe that everyone should have the opportunity to thrive, and in my opinion, housing intervention in neighborhoods and cities in the country it is the fastest way of achieving that goal. I believe that I'm not saying that housing, fixing the housing crisis fixes every problem, but I fervently believe that fixing the housing crisis makes every other problem much easier to solve. So that's why I'm in this business. And yeah, I'm also a poet. So,
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's great. So what are just kind of touching on, we'll just stick with the topic of affordable housing, but what are some of your objectives when it comes to affordable housing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best way to answer that is to kind of talk about the whole of affordable housing just briefly. So, I think a lot of times when we think about affordable housing, and for good reason, we think about homelessness, especially in California. We think about, the lack of transitional units and, opportunities for people to, either avoid or get out of homelessness. But when we talk about affordable housing, we're kind of talking about housing that's affordable for everyone. So, there are people who are making no money and need affordable housing. And if you're making no money, then what's affordable for you is free, essentially, right? We're talking about shelters and, stair-step programs, something to get you into a point where you're bringing in some money and you can support yourself. But we're also talking about people who are, just making a little bit less than average. And we live in a world, especially here in Sacramento, where, rent prices, cost of, sales prices for housing are going up and up and up. And that, sort of low and moderate income range of individual and family, they're struggling to find affordable housing because everything is so expensive. And then when you're talking about home purchasers, right? You can be making a pretty good income in Sacramento and still all of the homes on the market are hard to afford because they're so expensive. So affordable housing is an issue at every scale and at every level. Every level of housing affects every other level of housing. So, for example, if, all these people in the city can't buy a house, then there are more people renting. And if there are more people renting, the competition for rental units is higher. And then rent prices go up. Mm-hmm. And if rent prices go up, they go up at every level. And at the lower income price range of rental, then there are fewer units available. And then there's more competition for things like Section 8 and low-income housing tax credit, subsidized housing and all of these kinds of housing. So there are more people going after those units and there are fewer units available and then more people transition into homelessness. So every level of housing affects the others. So what my goals are, personally and professionally, I want to be part of the effort that, ends homelessness. I believe it's possible. I believe it's possible in our lifetime. I want to be part of the effort that introduces housing models that serve the community and are available to people at various ranges of the income scale. And yeah, that's essentially my goal. And then overarching with that, I'm very passionate about introducing housing, introducing resources in a way that keeps people in their neighborhood if they want to stay in their neighborhood. I don't want to be part of the effort that just builds housing that brings other people in and pushes the existing people out. I want to keep people in place. So, great. Essentially fix housing. That's my goal.
Yeah, I mean, right. And how do you, because I know, we all want to we all see it like all the time,
right.
Homelessness, is so there's a lot in Sacramento. How do you get people on the same, wavelength in terms of affecting change?
Right. Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it starts with voter education because, when you talk about, especially when you talk about homelessness, that really is something, in order to fix that problem, an organization like the one I work for, as a nonprofit, we don't have the budget to fix the problem, right? And most organizations, businesses don't. We really have to work through, our representatives and through our city to fix that problem, and ultimately the state and the nation. But I always believe starting locally is the way to get things done. I think starting with a educated, voter base on the topic of housing is really important. And understanding when people are pitching these ideas, what they're ultimately going to lead to. So there are a few examples out there, like, Salt Lake City, Utah has done a pretty good job historically of working with homelessness. There are a few cities in Canada that adopt what's traditionally called a housing first model, which I've noticed in California recently with the whole governor recall and all of that. There a lot of shades getting thrown at the housing first, and I think there's a lot of the waters are being muddy around what that means. But essentially, a housing first model would say, we recognize that the causes of homelessness are very complex. There's a major mental health crisis that leads into it. There's a major substance abuse crisis that leads into it, in addition to all of the other economic and structural crises that enable that to happen. But they recognize from the research in sociology that if someone's homeless, you're not going to fix the problem until you fix the causes of what caused that person to transition into homelessness. Those problems can't be fixed until somebody's housed, right? You can't get somebody, if maybe they need medication, maybe they need therapy, maybe they need job skills training, maybe they need something like this. That's not going to happen unless they're in a safe, secure environment, right? So Housing First says that you build the facility, whatever it is, you introduce people to a safe and secure environment, and then you start addressing the root issues that led them to a place where they transitioned into homelessness. And those programs are very successful in general. They're generally, a lot of studies will suggest they're much cheaper for a city than sort of dealing with the problems of just leaving people out on the street, between the vandalism and healthcare costs and public sanitation and things like that. So I think that having an educated voter base and knowing what people are pitching, what's the difference between, just putting people up in a hotel for 4 months but not doing anything else versus, building something that can operate for years to come, and has an exit strategy for everybody who comes in the door to stay in that environment. So the Sacramento Housing Alliance here has a lot of good resources on that kind of topic. I believe they hold meetings. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, thank you for giving that information too. For any listeners that want to learn more about it or I just see that there's a lot of, like, when you read news or there's a lot of like development like that is coming into play. But
right.
The article that I spoke about last week was in West Sacramento, the development plan and such. There is funding for it, but I don't know. I see that there is, obviously there's a huge need, and there's a budget for it, but we're not seeing anything happening, it seems, soon enough, So.
Right. It takes a lot of pushing of our representatives to implement the programs and implement the right programs. But it does also take people who are, put in charge of those initiatives, being very knowledgeable. And I think they are, for the most part. But more than anything, I think, we have to push for the results we want. And I know the article you referenced on your previous podcast about the development in West Sacramento. I think that's actually a good plan, a good program. I believe it's ran by Jamboree Housing, and they do good work. It's more of an extension on a facility they already have that I believe has 77 units. Yeah. So, and that's kind of one of the key issues for why things move slow, I believe. Construction just takes a long time. One of the major reasons we're in a housing crisis is because we're in a housing shortage. We're just not building enough things for our rising population. And unfortunately, that's one of the key barriers. So I know a lot of people are working very hard to make these things happen. But with sometimes the things that are put in place to protect people also slow things down. Just finding the money to do these projects, which I know there is money, but sometimes it has to go to vote, to use it in this way. And then, the vote might be 20 days away because that's the next scheduled meeting. And,
Yeah.
But I think more than anything, pressure is key. Take homelessness, that it's a hard problem to solve. It's not really a hard problem to solve. It's not, it's a fairly simple problem to solve in terms of knowing what to do. It's not like a calculus problem where it's like, how does this all fit together? It's, we have a lot of homeless people because we don't have enough places for them to live, right? We have to build the facilities and make sure they're supportive and all of that. In terms of how do we change our mindset, I think it's really interesting to talk about the cost of homelessness. I mentioned that earlier. And, everything I've read, and again, I'm just in the field, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm not a researcher. I'm just hands-on in the fields doing the work. But, everything I've seen, in terms of the economic estimates of what homelessness costs a city, right? It's generally somewhere between $40,000 and $100,000 a year per homeless person. When you add up the costs of, property damage, the costs of public sanitation, extra policing, jailing, the healthcare costs when, homeless folks have to go to the free clinics or the emergency room and these kinds of things. Whereas a lot of those costs are reduced or eliminated when you house someone. So when you look at when you just look at the cost, of producing facilities and then sustaining. Once facilities are produced, you might be looking at 10% of the cost of housing somebody versus the cost that the city adopts from the fallout of having people in these situations, right? So it's I think that's really important. And for me, and I think for you, compassion is enough for us, right? We want to help people by any means necessary. But also, if we think about a community and what's best for everyone, it's actually best for everyone just to get people housed. It's best for everyone in every way, from safety to, the economics of the situation, spending less taxpayer dollars. It's better for all of us. Nobody loses by solving this problem. And I think that is a really key factor.
Yeah. Like I definitely feel that at first, when you think about homelessness and stuff, you do think about all these other issues that go along with it, drug addiction, mental health is a huge one, but that was very eye-opening. What you said about is, that housing itself will help to solve some of these problems, because along with other treatments, I'm sure, but I think that, that's true. When you have a house when you have somewhere to settle, and somewhere, where you can just stabilize,
Yeah.
I think that in itself is and in the remedy of it all.
I think you're exactly right. And I think the research supports that, and then talking about, we've been talking about homelessness, but there are other issues. There's housing insecurity, right? So paying more than a third of your income on rent or paying more than half of your income on rent, right? Yeah. There's overcrowded housing, people, just having too many amp in the house. There's unsafe housing, housing with mold, housing with, porches that are falling through or subfloors that are rotting. There are all these things. And there's tons and tons of research about the connection between mental health and, specifically depression and anxiety, and safe, secure, affordable housing. And generally, like you said, if you're in a safe environment that you can afford, you're going to be dealing with less stress, and your mental health outcomes in general are going to be better. So there's a giant connection between those two things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I hadn't thoroughly thought about that, but that does make sense to me as somebody who has been mental health. But I applaud you for being in this type of work. I think it definitely is refreshing to hear somebody who who is trying to help the community in this way. So what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job?
Right. It's not something where it's going to be years and years before we see all of the results of what we're doing now. And it's taking pleasure the little wins along the way, right? Like this person who never thought they'd buy a house. This person, got into a better rental situation. We provided this resource to help. So taking pleasure, those little wins that set up the individual, sets up their family. And then also, on the community development side, which is a little more holistic, when a community gets a win, I think that's really, really great. I worked in one neighborhood in Tennessee where a low-income community, we had to go to city council about 6 times to try and get a trailer removed that this other company had in the way of a park we were trying to build. And we had the full legal right to make a move, but the neighborhood, we were poor, right? So we didn't have the political voice, and the person who owned the trailer was rich, right? And we wanted to turn this park into something special. It did get turned into something special, and I think it took 6 months of fighting to get a very basic, no-brainer decision to be made. Where we were, attending the meetings, going, public comment. Finally got it done. That kind of thing, even though it seems so basic and it's frustrating that it has to be that difficult, those kinds of wins, those are the most motivating, rewarding parts of what we do. And I just hope that someday I can look back and see the results on a bigger scale. But
yeah. Switching gears, we'll talk a little bit about, thank you for that, by the way. That was really opened, some stuff up for me for sure. So as far as poetry goes, I do want you to read one of your poems at the end. If you can, if you have time.
Yeah, I can. Plenty of time.
Okay, cool. How long have you been writing?
Yeah, no, I've been writing poetry for probably about 17 years.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Somewhere around there. I feel like I got good at it. I don't know. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I feel like I was a very bad poet for a decade, and then started to started to get good.
Yeah.
So
how do you use your voice? Like, I know that you said that you're inspired by some of what you do.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that in terms of my voice, what I've found works best for me is to think as little about myself in terms of like my voice coming through as possible. Taking life a little bit less seriously in a way, and just letting go. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but I have I've adopted a very nonchalant style of poetry where I just try to take life a little less seriously, and write things that are fun. I like to write things that are fun. Yeah, I like to make people laugh. And, not to say that I don't have some doom and gloom poems still, that's always going to happen. But, I try to, one of my goals in poetry is to mix things from the real world with things that are just out of this world. I write poetry with, not abstract, but wild concepts, headless people and zombies and aliens from outer space and all of that kind of thing. But I try to ground it in the real world in a way where it works together and tells us something about our life and just lets us enjoy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I understand that. I think everybody has a different, motivation or different goal really with their poetry. Some people want it to be like life-changing and so it is an expression for me too, but for me I use it more as like therapeutically. So I try to, I've done that in the past, but now I think my poetry it is enjoyment at the end of the day. So I definitely feel you on that. But you were just featured at SPC, Sacramento Poetry Center. How did that feel?
Well, it was my first time doing poetry over Zoom, but it was good. I think, I enjoyed it. I was honored to be invited and all of that. And, I got to do my weird poems and people seemed to like them.
Yeah, I watched it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really like the. I always like that poem, "Bury Me a Rosemary."
Oh yeah. Thank you.
Just called Rosemary, or
it's just called Rosemary.
You have a lot of visuals of. Well, your poetry is just purely visual to me, but but, a lot of things I just really liked it. But yeah, no, and then. When you're sitting in the crowd, sometimes there's distraction or, you don't really get to take them. But as I was watching it on Zoom, I was really just impressed. So I know that you're working on a new manuscript.
I am.
Want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I'm still in the early stages. So I hired an editor and I'm got that report back, and now I'm working on the final version of the manuscript, and I intend to have that done, within the next month or so.
Nice.
I have decided to go the traditional publishing route on this one. Okay. As opposed to the self-publishing route, I just want to experience it. I think is the biggest reason for me. And about half of the poems in the collection, and it's about chapbook length. It's not a very long manuscript.
Yeah.
But they're already published in journals and magazines and things like that. So I want to, start approaching literary agents and see where I can go with that. But it's essentially, it's untitled. It's an untitled manuscript. I'm still working on that. But the poems generally deal with love and the apocalypse. I think that's kind of the general theme.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
So Love in the Apocalypse. I think it's a great combination. Yeah. Do you want to tell people where they can like find your work? I know you've been published in a couple journals.
Yeah. Well, if you follow me on Instagram, it's all of that information is there. I mean, you can also look for me in, the Hash Journal. I have a poem there. The Something Involving a Mailbox, I have a poem there. Southern Florida Poetry Journal, I have a poem there. But it's all listed on my Instagram page, it's Kory Vance, and that's KoryVance .poems. That's my Instagram handle. So KoryVance.poems. Check me out there. It's same on Twitter, but I'm not as active on Twitter. So Instagram's really the better place to catch me.
Nice. Do you have a poem for us?
I do. I can do. I'll do one that's from my upcoming book, which I hope to have out this year. That's my goal. And I'll do one, and I'll do. I thought I would do a poem that at least mentions a house.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, great. So this poem is called A Mouse Named Heaven, and I hope you like it. All right, A Mouse Named Heaven. Let me be the one to hold you. Let me be the one to hold you, even if my hands get cold. Let me be the one to hold you. The wind picks up, the wind gets cold. We bought a little house with wooden floors and paneled cupboards. The little house was full of mice on our floors and in our cupboards. You loved the little mice, so we let them roam on our floors and in our cupboards. You loved the little mice, so we gave each mouse a name. We named each little mouse exactly the same name, and every little mouse in our little house was named Heaven. Let me be the one to hold you. Let me be the one to hold you, even if my hands get cold. Let me be the one to hold you. The point of love is growing old. A mouse named Heaven opened a mousetrap factory, and all the little mice worked in the mousetrap factory. And all the little mice believed in love and democracy. But the mice had no more time for love or democracy. And all the little mice died inside the mousetrap factory. And the mousetrap factory was named Heaven. Let me be the one to hold you. Let me be the one to hold you, even if my hands get cold. Let me be the one to hold you. I have no God. I want no gold. The little mice don't get a grave. They've already been to heaven. And all the graves would say the same. This mouse is still in heaven. Then all the mice who visit graves would see what heaven gives. They'd stand outside the church and shout, "To hell with all this heaven." Then all the little mice are renegades, and only God could love them. Let me be the one to hold you. Let me be the one to hold you, even if my hands get cold. Let me be the one to hold you. The wind picks up, the wind gets cold. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really good. I'm definitely going to copy.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on this
podcast. Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your words and just giving us that information. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Izzy Lala podcast. Join me, Izzy Lala, every Monday. And if you want to leave a comment or a message, you can email izzylala83@gmail.com or leave a voice message to 209-730-7044, and I will feature them on the next episode. So you can find me, Izzy Lala, on Instagram under Izzy Lala, or check out izzylala.com for more information. For now, wishing you all healing, hope, and light.